All right, and this is Woodwind Methods. Today I've asked Michelle to talk about the clarinet with us. So let's go ahead and get started and just think about what got you interested in playing the clarinet. Some things about like how long have you been playing and things. Can you talk a little bit about what started you?
When I was in 4th grade, everyone, they like went around, and I went to private school, and they kind of were like, oh, like you're studying band next semester, you have the opportunity to play in band, what instruments would you like to play? And I don't know, because we played recorder in 3rd grade, I don't know, clarinet kind of looked like a recorder, so I was like, clarinet should be easy, and I thought it sounded like really pretty. Like that's one of the things that I love about the clarinet is how like really beautiful and how it sings, and so I was like, well, I play the recorder, so I can play the clarinet. So that's kind of what got me into playing it. And then I would say since 4th grade, I've been playing for 10 years now. So.
Okay. I think that's interesting that you had a sound that you liked and that helped you choose. I know my daughter liked the sound of the viola. I have no concept of what a viola, but I said, you sure it's not a violin? And she was like, nope, viola. Yeah, so she knew the sound, and so I think that's really interesting. Let's kind of begin by you talking us through how you would put the instrument together. And I know you have the instrument in your case, and maybe we can set it up here so everybody can kind of see. Since she is more mature in her playing and has done it, for her to set it on her lap and put it together, that would be fine for her. With beginners, we always want to keep things on the floor. That way the chance of it falling and getting damaged with young students might be lessened quite a bit. Not that they can't kick it or do something. So why don't you talk us through real quick how you would start, and it's okay. There's no right or wrong way, but talk a little bit about being careful with certain paddle keys and things like that. And then Tom will home in on the screen to your fingers so we can show that, and just take your time.
The most important part is to get these two pieces together first because they have all the keys on them. So the most important thing to think about is these keys right here. A lot of beginners take the clarinet like this, and they shove it together. And when you do that, you actually, because of how loose these they can start moving back and forth, and then they don't cover the holes properly, and it moves the keys. So you have to pick a position where you're not actually causing any keys to move left or right. So the best way to do it is to take your fingers and put them like this so that they rest on this bar, but they're not going to twist that bar. And then the same idea with this one down here. There's a lot more to deal with, especially with these keys down here. These are notorious for getting pads messed up and kind of just messing up, like this bar right here. If you, a lot of beginners take the bar and they put it together like this, and then this bar gets moved. And that's horrible because it can mess up these notes and these notes. So what I like to do is how I was taught was to grab it like this so that you're just touching this one, but you're not squeezing it. And then you're gonna touch in between these keys right here. And then I take it like this, and then I just push it together. And you want to be careful not to twist too much, because every twist, every movement that you make can compromise any of these keys, and there's a lot of them. So have lots of cork grease. That's what I would say is always have cork grease on you, because if you have to really push everything in, it's going to ruin the instrument. So the alignment works right here. There's a nice little trick you can use to see if your clarinet's aligned. If you push down this key right here, this key up here shouldn't go up or down. So if it's not in alignment, this way, this key's gonna move. I don't know if you can hear that on the camera, but it kind of moves. But if it's in alignment, and you push that down, it's not gonna move. And then the other way, down here, you can't probably tell from the camera, but these keys down here aren't actually going down all the way. So it has to be right in the middle there. And a good indicator is, if it's a nice clarinet, is these two will match. And then when you're putting on the bell, this is just the upper joint and the lower joint. And then when you put the bell on, same idea, take your fingers, make sure they don't touch any keys, and just push it on. And then same thing with the barrel. Hold it down there. And if you need to, you can hold right here, but don't twist. Twist with this hand. Don't twist with the other hand. And then, I don't know if you want me to talk about the mouthpiece already.
Yeah, we'll talk about putting the reed on the mouthpiece and everything. A couple of thoughts on the upper and lower joint has that special paddle key that looks kind of like that you overlap. Upper joint, I think, sits on top of the lower joint paddle. So that's what she's lining up. And again, she's referring to not squeezing like the rods and bending the rods that way by torquing on it and doing it. Notice how easily her bell went on, so she didn't have to really fight with that. And doing that. I was thinking of one other thing, but maybe it'll come to me in a minute. One thing that I have them do, but that you're doing a little bit different, is I have them put the mouthpiece, before I put the reed on, put the mouthpiece on the barrel itself. And then once you get that put together, then set that down, put the rest of the clarinet together that way. That way they can grab the barrel and twist it onto the upper joint. It's a little easier, and then you don't like grab the ligature and twist your reed off once you get it on. So, but curious to see putting that together. So if you want to show us, you can set your clarinet down, and then just talk a little bit too about preparing the reed before you would play it too, because we just don't want to put it dry on there.
So the most important part of the clarinet is the reed. It's what makes or breaks your sound, and so I usually have, how many is this? Six reeds that I can use any of these. Some of them are worse than others. Some of them I just practice with. Some of them are marked as like performance. I don't know if I have any performance ones right now. Let me see. I sometimes put a little G on there for good. Very complex math there.
That's good.
But then I have some back here as well. So I always have more than one. You never want to just have one reed, because if it breaks, then you can't use it, or if it chips. So I think my best reed is this one right now. And then there's two ways that you can put a reed on. While I'm assembling my clarinet, usually I have my reed just sticking in my mouth, getting it wet, because in order for the wood to vibrate, you need it to be wet. So you could just stick it in like a little cup of water, but typically we're lazy, so we just use our saliva. So that's cute.
Now, is the kind of water you use, like certain water off tap might have, a lot of minerals in it that might not be good for it. I've heard.
Well, yeah, it's actually funny because my teacher, she doesn't like it when I use like just my saliva or whatever, my mouth, because your saliva actually has breaking down qualities.
Right.
So you're essentially breaking down the reed every time you put it in your mouth. So any other water probably would be more clearer, even if it's
Maybe distilled, or is that not a good kind of water to
It
use?
doesn't, you could use water from like a drinking fountain or like a sink. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect it because it doesn't have a strong, compounds in it. But I guess that's a debate for a person who likes that kind of thing. But so I put the mouthpiece on last, and then, so this way, there are two ways to do it, and then you just go on like this, right? Or do you go this way?
Oh, no. I always
like
stick
this?
the fat side in. So if the fat side hits the ligature, it's not going to hurt the reed.
Yeah.
But if you put it in from the bottom, you could catch the top, and then you've ruined your reed. So, but
So like the reason we're talking about it is because the ligature, if you try to put the ligature on after the reed, you could end up hitting the ligature. So go like this and you hit it, then you're going to chip your reed. So for beginners, and maybe even a little bit more, you want to take as much contact away from the reed, from the top of the reed as possible. So you would take it and you would just slide it on the top like this. And then you would just kind of adjust it like that and then screw it on. And then later, typically the way that I do it and the way that I feel like I can get a more secure grip on it is to put the reed on first and adjust it and then hold it with my thumb. And then as I'm holding it with my thumb, you place it on top. And you can still kind of adjust it before you tighten the ligature. And then you just tighten the ligature. And one of the most important things about putting the reed on is, and I think a lot of teachers don't talk about this, is you don't have to tighten the ligature as tight as it possibly can get. What I've been told when I was growing up, was you can actually keep it as loose as you can without the reed falling off. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
Yes.
But because it allows the reed to speak, and the tighter you push the ligature on, you're putting the wood closer to the mouthpiece, and so it's not going to speak as well if it's really, really tight. So you can actually just keep it as loose as possible without it, actually falling off.
Yeah, I think ligatures are a very personal thing. I see you have a standard ligature. Well, it's probably a little fancier standard shape of it, though.
Yeah.
But I had also heard there's certain ligatures that come in like a figure eight, where only a small portion with a bump is what touches the reed, and the rest of the ligature doesn't go against the reed. So the less surface area holding that reed in place actually helps it vibrate better too. So, but yes, and I tell them not to tighten the screws all the way or too hard, because it'll actually break the screws. It could break your ligature, and they're fairly expensive depending how much you want to get into it.
Mm-hmm.
What about placement of the reed on the mouthpiece? For example, do you like it a hair above? Do you like it even, or a hair below? Can you talk about placement of the reed?
Mm-hmm.
How do you check that?
Well, a lot of people say, and the way I used to say it is does the mouthpiece go, or does the reed go below the mouthpiece or above the mouthpiece? And I like to joke, it's the answer is yes. It goes both ways. It actually depends on the reed, what kind of reed you're using. This reed I think is a little bit softer, and what I do is more of a playing test. And what you have to do is fit it to what sounds the best for this reed. It's not necessarily all reeds need to go in this specific spot. A lot of times, if the reed is softer, you need to push it up a little bit above the mouthpiece. Not too far, but just a little bit above in order to get a harder sound. And then if the reed is really hard, then you push it a little bit below. So I usually just do, and that's a pretty good spot right there. But if it wasn't, then I would just adjust it a little bit and then try it again.
Okay.
So.
Now, with beginners, I've had more success with it being a hair above, like what I call a freshly cut fingernail, but putting it a little bit below, the beginners tend to bite down a little more than normal because they're not sure, they don't have the muscle memory yet. So again, I've had more, but I'm not saying there's one way, but I've had more success with it being a hair above.
Yeah.
And,
I would say for younger students, don't really worry about getting it much below, and try to get it maybe even with the top of the mouthpiece. But and you can kind of see on this one, it is actually a little bit above. So that's typically the best place to put it. There are very rare cases where it needs to go below. But again, you just have to test it and see.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've not seen that, testing it out, listening for the best tone. So that gives me another perspective, something else to add. Great, good information.
Yeah.
All right. I think, do you use a neck strap, or what are your thoughts on neck straps? Maybe just for beginners, or I've seen professionals use it. Is there any?
For clarinets, it's not necessary to use a neck strap like saxophones, but I think the most important thing about learning the clarinet is relaxation. One of the most important things for a beginner to learn is to play with the clarinet in your lap and always have it resting in some way. I think a lot of times teachers don't focus on the relaxation of the arms when you're playing. And you're just gripping the instrument so tight and that's how I used to play, is I was really tight, and you can't really play, with your instrument in between your knees, but if you focus on that type of thing, And that's what a neck strap does, is it takes the pressure off your hands and it takes it off your wrists, and that's really important. So if that's what you need to use in order to take that pressure off your hands and arms, I think it's good. I think it's great. But it's not necessary for a clarinet player. I think the most important thing is finding a comfortable position so that you're not stressing your arms and your wrists and your hands. So if you need to lay it in between your knees and then pull your feet up a little bit when you're playing in order to get that pressure off your hands, when you're first learning, if you need to use a neck strap. But I think the ultimate goal is to make sure that there's not pressure in your tension.
So standing, that would not work, you know? It'd be
Yeah,
kinda awkward
that's
to
why,
play.
yeah, I said when you're starting to play, always start by sitting down, because standing up is it's a whole different
Yeah,
story.
that is. With beginners, I always recommend a neck strap if they're very small, very tiny, and their fingers are really small, just to make sure they're covering the holes. It's one less thing to think about. And most clarinets can adapt to a neck strap too, so I think that's good. That's a good thought there. How about talking a little bit about forming the embouchure? And we do a certain thing with a note with the barrel and the mouthpiece, but for right now, can you talk about, you know, how do we form our mouth or embouchure, and how does it relate to clarinet? Maybe even an illustration or something that you would use with your beginners.
Yeah.
In there.
The way that I like to explain embouchure is you're using and this is the way it was explained to me, is you're using most of your mouth muscles right around here. These are so important, and they're so tiny, but they're so important when you're playing the clarinet and a lot of different instruments. But I like to think a very tight lower lip. So I take my my teeth and I place my lower lip right over my teeth like that. So it's a very smooth resting place for your mouthpiece and reed. And it has to be a little bit of a cushion. And the way you get it to a cushion is you actually have to push your lip in with these muscles right here. And that's something that you actually have to work on. And I recommend for students first learning the clarinet and as they progress on is to watch yourself in a mirror, because if you don't see that reaction when you put your clarinet, if your lips aren't completely covering the mouthpiece like that, and you won't be able to tell unless you're looking at yourself in the mirror. And you can play your clarinet all day, but you're not going to get that tightness unless you can see it, because you won't be able to feel it really. I don't think once you start doing it right, you will. But in order to learn it, you have to practice in the mirror, and it hurts at first, and it's tiring because these are very weak muscles, and you're putting them in this weird function that they've never done before, and you're pushing them in. And the way I like to describe it is like a drawstring bag almost. So you're like zipping it up and everything is coming in and you're just engulfing the mouthpiece. And you don't want to think of it as tight, because a lot of times if you use the word tight, then people start biting on your lower lip and you get like a squeak kind of. So it's supposed to be, the note is, but if you bite, you get like a squeak. And that's just because I took my lower lip and I just bit on the top, or on the lower half. So I don't like to use the word tight more as much as activated. Activate your muscles around your mouth. Use them. Even if they're not necessarily in the right spot yet, they'll get there. But just take those muscles and pull them into place. And you might even have to start without a clarinet in your student's mouth, and then have them form that embouchure, what we call it, and then say, okay, now put your clarinet in your mouth and try to do that same thing. And that's going to take a while because, like I said, these are new muscles that you're just learning to use. And is there a certain way that you need to form them? Like, you make this smile and do this? Not necessarily. I don't think it's the same for everybody. It's getting those muscles, activating those muscles, not tightening, activating, and pulling them in as far as you can get them to engulf and
Right.
pull that drawstring and get it around the
Yeah,
mouthpiece.
I think the drawstring illustration is exactly what I use with that.
Okay.
I refer to the sides of the mouth as the corners.
Mhm.
You know, you should have firm corners. I like the word firm. It doesn't indicate two.
Yeah.
But, and show me dimples, I might say, but pull those corners in, do the drawstring. Yeah, excellent illustration and exactly, I think, what happens with that. As far as blowing, that frees up the airway. If we bite down with that bottom lip, you're digging your teeth into the lip. You're actually damaging the lip, so you could have other problems later that we do that. Now, you put something over your teeth. Maybe
Oh, yeah.
beginners wouldn't do that, but you have a little, I think it was in the bottom of here.
I have a bunch of them.
Okay.
This is just floral tape. Actually, some people use cigarette paper, but it's just to, the more that you play, obviously your clarinet is resting on these bottom teeth. So, and I would like to argue that it makes a better sound because these teeth right here aren't necessarily even all the way across. There's like a little gap in between the teeth. And so it's not like a smooth runway, I would say. So what my teacher taught me was to use like a little piece of floral tape, just a very thin piece, and then you just kind of form it over those teeth right there, and it makes like a smoother runway for the air to pass over, and for your lip to be more comfortable as well
Right.
over the teeth.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that does that.
yeah.
Do you know if you took your barrel off and played a pitch, do you know what pitch that would be on your mouthpiece and barrel?
No, I don't.
You know that, Tom?
Should be an F sharp.
Should be
Is
an
it?
F sharp. So go ahead and play that, and I will check on the piano concert pitch.
I mean, I can manipulate it.
So roughly, what I do is I use that as a key, talking to other clarinet teachers, to make sure if they get pretty close to an F sharp on the barrel and mouthpiece, then we know their embouchure is fundamental, it's correct. If you get really odd sounding pitches, maybe their mouth is too loose, go ahead and bend the pitch and do some things. But as you try to pull in your corners and keep things the way it's supposed to be, we get that F sharp. And so that's one way for beginners. You can just double check to make sure that things are at least aiming in the right direction.
Yeah.
So, all right, good. Posture, what I typically say is front half of the chair. Even though these are posture chairs, Wenger makes a posture chair, I'm still all about front half of the chair, back straight, feet flat. So although as we get older, I find myself like Sunday in church, I was crossing my ankles under my chair anyhow, which is not great. It actually takes the pressure off our diaphragm so we breathe correctly. But do you have any thoughts about posture with clarinet that you try to do, or?
I think that it's kind of hard. It maybe varies from person to person, but in order to be relaxed, this isn't a relaxed position for me with both my feet like this. And I think even speech teachers kind of tell you to have one slightly forward and one slightly back. I don't know if that's a proper way to do it. And also sometimes, like when I'm trying to play, keep my arms relaxed, and I just kind of pull this leg up a little bit so that I can get my bell right here. And then obviously I would have to go like this because of this skirt.
So you actually use your leg to support the instrument. So I think with beginners, I don't know. I try not to have them do that unless they're having some trouble.
Yeah.
And then I can see where.
I think that, yeah, I think you're right because they can get in a bad habit of kind of.
And then slouching, yeah.
Yeah.
And then head
So I
coming
would,
down.
yeah, I guess for a beginner you would say keep your elbows at your waist. That's really important is because a lot of people kind of sometimes play like this, and that's not right. You're supposed to keep them back here. And actually like close to your side as you possibly can. That's the most relaxed position for a clarinet player. And Yeah.
It's okay. I have to do it, being that I play trumpet, so my arms are up much higher than your position.
Yeah.
So you don't have any thoughts about the instrument being in front of the knees, behind, I mean, it's just, again, finding that sweet spot where you're getting the best tone. And I think even for beginners, focus on best tone, because everybody's mouth is different, everybody's instrument's different, reeds are all different. I think if they can focus on having good tone quality, that's what's going to follow them the rest of their life. I don't care how fast their fingers are, they have poor tone quality, it's poor tone quality. Nobody wants to listen to that.
Yeah.
Good. Any thoughts on standard fingerings, or even, I guess I'll start with the use of the register key. This is on the back. Do you have a certain way you like to manipulate your register key, or what you would tell a beginner or a young player about usage of the thumb?
So the register key is this one back here. If you have all your fingers down on this hand, you get this note. And if you hit the register key, same fingering, you get a G. So you go from C to a G. And the most important part about learning the register key is keep all your fingers in place and then just slightly inch up to the key. I mean, you don't really, it's not even an open key. It's just a lever that you have to kind of push down. So you just need to keep your thumb and just rotate it just a little bit. And that's what I tell them, because you don't even need to open all the way. You don't need to force it. And that's a problem. I don't know if you heard my wrist pop just now, but it'll mess up your wrist if you're constantly going like this. Like, that's not good. So the way to do it properly is your thumb is already there. You just push it down just a little bit.
I might mention, just flex your thumb slightly.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
dead. Yeah.
Don't get your
Economy-
wrist into it.
Economy of motion, so less motion, dead. And same thing with facility and fast fingers. Keep your fingers close to the keys, so it's economy of motion. So
Yeah.
a lot of wasted. Good, excellent. How about alternate fingerings? Like, how often do you do that, or it just depends on what? And do alternate fingerings sometimes only get used if you're ascending or just descending, or might you use a different fingering? Can you talk about that?
I think what you're talking about is when you're in the throat range, which is these keys right here. This is a note right here. This is a note. This is a note. This is a note. So these notes right here, they're called throat tones, and they always sound airy, awful, and usually out of tune. So an important thing to kind of implement is putting these fingers down when you're playing these notes. So I don't know if you hear the difference of the resonation when I put my fingers down. And that's also like if you're trying to go up a scale. Oh, sorry. Sorry. But if I'm going up, I'm going to be using from the G. That's when I put those down. And then I'm going to use it for that. And then when I go to that B right there, I already have these 3 fingers down, so I just have to put these fingers down right here. And then one that you use for B flat is this one. I don't know if you hear the difference, it's like a ring. So it's 2, 3, 2, 3. And then, but you only use it if it's going to be in a slower passage, because if you add those fingers and you're trying to go fast, you might mess up the rest of the notes. And then I usually use it when I'm going up, and then not necessarily when I'm going down. It depends on how fast the passage is, I would say.
Yeah, I've heard the overtones are a little bit different depending which direction you go. Trombone is like that too, where your slide position may be in a little different position, so you have to adjust depending if you're ascending or descending. That's why I asked that.
Yeah.
I do know that adding non-consecutive keys to a fingering, typically, not all the time, sometimes it'll change your note, but most of the time it will. The more keys you add non-consecutive, the more it pulls the pitch down too. Yeah, I like that. That's really good. Throat tones are your G, second line G, treble clef G, A flat, A natural, and B flat. So 4 notes, probably worst notes could be in the top couple of the worst notes on the clarinet. So good.
Yeah.
And how about this idea of voicing? Can you just really briefly, because it's just something that when we have a note that the tone quality is different or something, can you talk about that a little bit?
With voicing, there are 3 different registers, and the names are escaping me right now, but there's the lower register, the mid register, and a high register. And the high register, I think, is the most important, where you have to switch your voicing. And it's actually just thinking it, and also I like to focus on like the abdomen, pushing out as you're changing a register, a little puff of air almost, support. Because when you're going to into that high range, the tendency is it's high, what you want to do is bite, and in order to combat that, I think to think pushing like you're going into a new register is kind of the best way to think about it. Because if you go at it as like, I need to punch it, it's either gonna squeak, or it's not gonna come out, it's gonna do like a grunting sound. And so I actually, when I teach my students, I have them play a lot of notes up high, because in order to play notes on the high register of the clarinet, like those high notes, they take a lot of relaxation in your throat, in your abdomen. So if you start them on that, and even right now you can kind of hear it's a little grunty. So if I start and I play those notes over and over again, I work them up until they sound a lot better. And then even when I go to play the lower register, it sounds a lot smoother, because practicing that higher register, it takes lots of relaxation, lots of embouchure, very strong embouchure. So is there a change in the registers? Yes. I would say focus on pushing in your abdomen, pushing out to the next register, but also focus maybe on the higher register, and then take them down to the lower register. Because if they can reach that high register and be relaxed, and then they can play everything else.
Okay, great, wonderful. All right, real quick, vibrato.
Oh.
Now, I know how I feel about that. I don't think clarinet, I just don't use it at all, but there are some. Richard Stoltzman is a big proponent of vibrato. Well, how do you feel about it? And what if your student asked you, I really want to do that?
Yeah. Well, a thing about clarinet is it's not typically an instrument that uses vibrato. I guess it depends on what genre you're interested in. But it's not necessary for a classical clarinetist to learn vibrato, but it's mostly I believe that they mostly use it here, and they just kind of move up and
A
down.
little bit of jaw. I mean, you could do diaphragmatic also, but
Yeah.
I didn't really want to get into what, just your thoughts on that. But
Yeah.
again, I don't think it's very practical. Don't necessarily
I don't-
like it.
Yeah, I don't teach it. My teacher briefly taught me how to do it just so that I know how to do it. But it doesn't sound very good, and it just wasn't really made for the instrument, I would say. It's just not practical for the clarinet itself. It doesn't sound very good. So, no,
Okay.
I don't recommend it.
Okay, all right. Can you play just like a low F scale and just let us see kind of a close-up of your fingers, how the changes in your fingerings changes the pitches, just so we can see how that works there. So you can do it. So even though you did 2 octaves, your change of fingerings, it almost like cycles through another repeated same set of fingerings just in it. Again, the register key changes as a 12th, but we can see that in the change. How about just a little hymn, it doesn't have to be all of it, but just part of it. don't use vibrato, your way of shaping and really making connections with the musicality is going to be more. I know the clarinet's the closest to the human voice, roughly. I believe that is. And so you have the largest dynamic range of any instrument, and as a wind instrument. So I think that's helpful. All right, I think you had a little bit of Mozart. You might want to
Oh, yeah.
play a little bit. So.
Let me try that again.
Okay, yeah, no, that's good. So a little taste of the clarinet. Is there anything else that maybe I didn't ask you that you think would be helpful for the class to know about the clarinet?
I think when teaching the clarinet, it's important to, with any instrument, make sure that the student is relaxed. Because, like I said, if you're tensing, if you're biting, you're going to get squeaks, your fingers are going to move. That's another thing to kind of focus on, is making sure the student is covering the holes, because typically what will happen is with these lower keys, they're much bigger, and so the tendency is kind of to pull up, and then you're not covering down there, or to pull down, and then you're not covering there. So sometimes, like when my student is playing, I'll take their fingers and I'll keep my fingers over their fingers while they're playing, and then they'll feel when they're moving it, you know, and then they'll like, oh yeah, you're right, I am moving those fingers. It's not typically a problem up here because these holes are a lot smaller, but with these big ones, it's very important to make sure that their wrist is rotated in the right way, and they're only going to be able to practice with it rotated in the right way if these fingers are all facing the right way. So just thinking relaxed, thinking covering the holes, using your diaphragm, yeah.
Yeah, I think I always talk about the pads of the fingers, and you should feel the circle of the hole under your fingertips. Tom, if you could get like a close-up of her hand right here. I'm going to show something that's kind of a pet peeve of mine for clarinet players that you want to watch for your students, is using, and forgive me for touching your finger, but using these side keys right here as the instrument to rest on that. So not so much pushing it down, but using it as a holding position. I see this often. What it does is it gets the index finger a little bit high on that key. So in order for the student to compensate for it, they kind of turn their hand down. Then you get a cockeyed wrist position, which can really cause carpal tunnel problems and pain, and not a good thing. So keeping the hand, but that's like a real important thing to watch with your beginners. And I think don't let them get into that habit. If you can help them, remind them, show them. So, Michelle, thank you so much for sharing with us, and appreciate you doing this. So, all right.